Is on now? Yes. Yes. Technology is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. A very good evening, everybody. I, Ritik Raheja, co-team member of Azure Developer Community Dehradun, welcomes you all in today's session of AZ-104 Bootcamp. So we, on a day 4, have Mr. Samik Roy with us. He is lead cloud developer at Open System, community speaker, and contributor. He helps customer to use Microsoft Sentinel on scale, and he loves to tell stories with the data. There is an announcement too. At the end of session, we will be announcing the week 3 challenge winners. So I hope everyone must be very excited for it. So guys, stay tuned to the session. Over to you, Samik.
Thank you, Hrithik, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you to everyone who has already joined. So maybe you can say something in the chat so that we can get interactive. Yeah. So good evening, everyone. All right, and thanks again for taking out your time on a Saturday evening and then joining us for learning together. Right. So with that, I'll just mention about that today is the day 4 of our boot camp, right? And from the beginning, we have Saurav talking about the whole certification path, and on the next one, we have identity management by Ilyas. And previous week, I talked about storage, and this week we're gonna learn about networking, right? And these are all targeted about on the certification called AZ-104. So we have all the links posted and all the videos available in link in YouTube for you to look at, so feel free to look at. And just to highlight on the video part, right? So we have a discussion, and then it was more of an understanding, and the content is good enough for what Microsoft has in their learn portal. So feel free to go through the documentation of Microsoft, and they have a very good learning path as well as knowledge test for you to learn and track the learning, track your learning as well as prepare for the certification, right? So with that said, I would like to start today, right? um, so today's topic is, let me try to share my screen, and then let me share. Okay, what was share my screen, and share screen, and yep. So if you could confirm me that you can see my screen and the presentation as well. Yep. So guys, if one of you can confirm that you can see my
Yeah, Samik,
screen.
it is visible. It is visible.
Wonderful. Thank you. And feel free to have your questions in the chat, right? I'll try to pick them up as and when we go. If not, definitely I'd like to address this later towards, and then you can always reach out to me in LinkedIn for any queries or any clarifications, right? So with that, I'll just move on to the next slide, which is about the day 4, and then on AZ-104 bootcamp, right? And I'm going to skip my introduction because I've already talked about it last week. So I just a lead cloud developer at Open Systems. So with that, let us look at what we're going to understand today. So we're going to understand two basic things, which is virtual networking and network traffic management. All right. So before I jump into the session, right, let's try and understand, why do we need a network even, right? So maybe many of us are from computer background, and then we have used computers in the past, right? So and today's world in cloud computing, we are very familiar that we have high scale computation in cloud, but network is the connector which connects two devices. And when we say two devices, right, it's very important to understand that that may not be similar in nature. For example, right, you might be at your home, you are using your mobile to connect to your wi-fi. So your wi-fi is a device, right? And then your mobile is also connected to the same device, and that's through no network. So that's where the fundamental need of network, right? And I'll also add on why we talk about virtual networking, right? So it's like when we talk about Azure and cloud, so we know that the servers are in clouds, they are in data center, they are at scale. So even though the networking tool, right, the hubs, the switches, right, whatever we see, those are all virtual because you don't access them physically. So Azure has a layer, foundation layer built on top, and then we can just use the Azure user interface, right, to basically create our virtual networks, right? And when I say virtual, so we do not need to worry about the infrastructure where the appliances, the network appliances are running behind the scene, right? We just go and create, and I'm gonna show the demo today, right, how quickly we can just create a virtual network, and why that is important. So with that, and also once we talk about network, right, even whatever website we access, whatever virtual machine we access, everything is within network. So once anything is a network, right, whatever, even if you take an example of the webinar we are right now, right, so I'm talking, and then the data is getting into binary, and then getting into the stream, and then you are able to reach it out. So that's definitely happening through the network, right? And that's where the network traffic management comes, because why it's important is you have a network, you want to pass on some data from one place to another, right? But you cannot send x amount of data or y amount of data, over a certain low bandwidth or certain low capacity resource. So that's where traffic management of network is also important. So that's where we talk about today's checklist. So with that said, let me click onto the next one. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're going to configure virtual networks in Azure today, right, and see how that works. And yep, and let us try and understand what are the minute details we need to understand, right, when we configure virtual network. So one thing is obvious, right, that we have to plan for the network, and we are going to create subnet. So for everybody who is new, right, subnet is a segment of a virtual network which can be acting as an isolated option with for traffic, for managing the traffic between two, like the data transfer or the network data related things like that. Now we're going to create virtual networks, right? We are going to plan the IP addresses. So again, on IP addresses, there can be public, there can be private. So the only differentiator, right, in a public and private IP address is, for example, if I am connecting to my home infrastructure, right? If I have a public IP address, maybe I'm connected to my laptop, I've connected to my mobile through my Wi-Fi, right? So Wi-Fi to Wi-Fi, my mobile and my laptop are local. So they will assign, maybe I'll try to show you as well. They will assign local IP address, right, or private IP address to my devices. So if you look at your ify config/all, right, anybody in the screen, they hit this command, right? Mostly if you're in a corporate network, you might get starting IP with 10 dot something, or if we are in a home network, we will most probably get 192.168.1 dot 2345, whatever the node number is or the device number. So maybe my machine or my laptop might be 192.168.1.23, and my mobile can be .25, right? Those are kind of public IP address, because they has to talk to each other through Wi-Fi, right? And same goes for the smart TVs and things like that, right? And all these things are possible with a hardware called network interface card, and which we mostly know as NIC card, right? Now when you talk about public IP address, right, so if we look at our right, there's a website called what is my IP. So if we type that in our browser, right, we can see what is our public IP, right? And we can exercise and apply this exercise in our mobile as well as in our laptop, for example, and we are going to get the same IP address. The reason is only my router, which is my exit node, right, is basically internet facing, and that has a internet IP address. That's where you're going to get the same IP address as long as you're connected to single Wi-Fi, right? So with this context, right, if we talk about big organization, right, they have their offices in multiple places all across the globe, and then each office has to talk to another office, right, in terms of networking. So they will have a public IP address, they have a private, privatized network as well. So what happens over there, for example, right, you work for company A, and company A has a HR portal which manages their employee salary, employee details, things like that. So now that application need not to be hosted outside the company, right? So it's enough that employees can only access within the company. So let's say that server is in a data center or in Azure, right? All the traffic will be routed privately within the company. So that's where the private IP address is important. And let's say sitting on in a corporate office, you're trying to access something in Bing, or you try to access portal.azure.com, right? You're gonna access it through a public IP address or public route. So that's where the difference between private and public IP addresses, right? And obviously on the process we can associate any public IP address. So probably in a demo, right, we will try to create a virtual machine, and then we will look at that, how virtual machine can have a private IP as well as a public IP, right? So with that, I'll go to the next one, right? So this is more on in the planning section. And one thing to focus and understand very deeply is, when you talk about network, right, network is not something you do it day in day out. You just structure it from the very beginning, thinking of the scalability. So for example, we don't design a network, or we don't design a virtual network thinking one virtual machine or one application in place. We have to plan it accordingly, for our future, right? And that's how the entire hierarchy is going to be there. So if we look at the screen right here, we have virtual networks, and sorry, we have a virtual machine which have network interface card, right? And again, there are cases where one virtual machine can also have multiple network interface cards. So that's again hybrid scenario though. But at a normal case, if we talk about our machines, or when you provision a virtual machine in Azure, right? So basically what happens, that comes up with a virtual network interface card, and network interface card is responsible for all your network traffics, right? So now what you can do is, when you plan at a basic level, right, all the VMs can be within a subnet, right? And you can logically represent your network the way we can see it here, right? Now going little further, we can have a dedicated, you know uh, cloud only network, so that though Azure isn't public, right, you can access it publicly, portal.azure.com. But let's say you have 50 virtual machines, or other application to be hosted in Azure, but if you want them only to talk to each other, and there's no internet facing. So for example, let's say you have, 5 developers working on SAP, right? They want to work in Azure, and they can be working separately, and then they do not need internet access, but they have to access each other machines, right? In that case, we can have a dedicated virtual network where we can, make sure that there's no internet connection there, and we can put all 5 virtual machine in a single VNet, right? Now that's the basic things of virtual networking. Now if we really talk about the enterprise scenario, right, we can have virtual networks which will cover your on-premises network as well as your cloud network. So for example, if you really want to have 2 machines from your infrastructure, which is your corporate infrastructure, and 2 machines in your cloud to talk to each other, and nobody outside should be able to access that, we can as well do that with a hybrid network structure, right? So that's where we proceed and then plan the virtual network in a way that we cover it on cloud only scenarios, and we also cover it, in a hybrid scenarios, right? So that's how we plan for it, right? So with that, if we look at a virtual network, right, and virtual network has, it's basically a combination of couple of subnets, right? And then each subnet, based on the type of subnet you choose it, right, it can have that many available IP addresses. So the number of IP addresses it has, that many network interface card can be assigned to that. So what does it mean is, like, for example, if you look at subnet 0, right, here it has 250 IP address. So it's like, and then if you look at subnet 1, it's 251, 251. So whatever we choose, right? So /24 is like, we have a very great formula on IP address calculation, on getting the number of IP address, right? And accordingly we can create the subnets, and then all the subnet can be tied to a vnet, right? Now each subnet can, hold x number of ips, and each ips can be assigned to network interface cards. So when I say network interface card, it may be, one machine, or a machine having multiple network interface card over there. So for example, right, if you all up have heard of, firewalls, right? So firewall doesn't run on a physical machine or virtual machine. They have like appliances, hub switch, and there are things like that, right? So what happens is firewall can be privatized within a subnet, and that's how we can segregate. So it's not necessarily that, you have to have a physical computer to have IP address assigned. It can be assigned to even smaller or different appliances as well, right? And when you talk about creating virtual networks, right, so there are two things which has to happen in parallel: creating a virtual network, and the virtual network has to have a virtual machine attached to it. Then only it can work. Then only that means that virtual machine is going to use that network to use its network activity or the network traffic, right? And and you need to define at least one subnet, because once you do a virtual network, as I mentioned, virtual network is a combination of a couple of subnets. So virtual network, you create a subnet, and you create attach a virtual machine to it, right? And you also need to make sure that there is no overlap within subnet. If that happens, right, it'll be a conflict, right? And we're going to see all this when you see a demo of creating a virtual machine, right? And we talk about public and private IP address, right? So again, let's say take an example of virtual machine. When you create a virtual machine, right, it internally creates a public IP address to make sure that, we are over open internet, right? We should be able to access the virtual machine, and that's where it creates a virtual public IP address, right? And we're going to see all this in a demo as well, right? Now the thing is, once we create a public IP address, and once we turn off the VM, there can be two things. One, we can store the IP address, right? There are cases, let's say you are using a development VM, or you want to give it to a developer, or maybe you're using it for a particular system, right? That time we want to preserve that IP address and switch off the VMs. Otherwise what happens is, if we don't preserve this, next time when you restart or recreate the VM, or maybe restart the VM, right, the old IP address is washed away, and then a new IP address is assigned, right? So that can be cumbersome to be maintained throughout the process, right? Now we can also have something like dynamic and a static, and obviously there are redundancy factors, like we can based on do it based on the zone redundancy, and then things like that, right? So and obviously there are two type of IP addresses of today, right? So one is IPv4, right? IPv4 is a 32-bit address. So if you do a 32-bit, right, 2 to the power, I mean something like 2 to the power 32, right? That's how we do it in the bits calculation. And IPv6 is 122 bits. So the range of IPv6 is way high, but it is not yet has come to very generic practice. So we stick to always we'll still stick to IPv4. So IPv4 is something, we can have 32-bit address, right? And obviously we can choose a basic or standard queue in that manner, right? Now once, let's say, a public IP address is created, right, next one what happens is we have to assign that public IP address to a resource, right? So that we can access that resource through that application. So just take an example of virtual machine, right? Virtual machine have a network interface card, right, and it can hold a dynamic IP address configuration or dynamic public IP, as well as a static web, a public IP. So again, internal load balancer or load balancer can be accessed to the right front end configuration, and it supports both dynamic and static IP addresses. We have VPN gateway. So what is a VPN gateway? VPN gateway is more of a tunnel. Let's say if I'm using I'm sure many of you have heard of VPN, right? We try to access things in VPN which doesn't get access generally. So what happens in VPN, let's say if I'm using machine and I'm connecting to a VNet, right? Sorry, I'm connecting to a VPN gateway. So that takes me takes me through another network with a secure channel, and I can obviously have a dynamic or a static IP address to the gateway as well. And we also can assign an IP address to a application gateway. So in application gateway, it's similar to the load balancer, right? It is similar, almost similar to the load balancer. It just works on application level, which let us configure a dynamic or a static IP address on that, right? And yeah, so to look at the full flow, a public IP address, we can be assigned to a virtual machine or a network interface card basically to it, right? And internet facing load balancers and VPN gateways and application gateways. So anything, if you look at the list, can be having a public IP address, right? Now let's look at the next one. And we talk about private, right? So private, as talked about, which is internal to a network, right? So it need not to be the internet facing. So let's say in Azure you have 50 virtual machines or 50 resources, right? You want to talk to each other, we can have a private private IP address assigned to it, and then that private address can be dynamic and static. So the difference is static gonna be same even if we restart the machine or shut down the machine and start it again. And the dynamic can be every time we detach it from the network, it and reattach it, it gets a new IP address possibly, right? And the same thing goes for internal load balancer. So like we have external load balancer, right? Let's say we have a service hosted in one of the servers which is coming from internet. So based on the internet traffic, the load balancer will actually redirect it to a right server, right? Same thing happens in an internal piece as well. So if we have a internal application, right, that can be running on an internal load balancer, and then that can decide based on the request. So as I talked about this HR application, right, which may be internal to a company, right? In that place we can have an internal load balancer, so that let's say as an example, during appraisal time or during salary days, we try to access it at the most, right? So in that case, if the load gets higher, internal load balancers is the right thing to put in there. And obviously that has to be a part of your network design and your application design as well, to make sure that it can balance the load right way based on the number of users you have, based on the number of concurrent connection you have, and other factors, right? And the same goes for application gateway as well, right? Yep. And what happens, what's the dynamic and static differentiation, I would say. So if I take, if you observe, you can just do this exercise by yourself, and you realize, right? So let's say you have two devices, a computer and a mobile, and then you try to attach or try to connect to a Wi-Fi, right? And the reason I'm trying to pull you a basic example, because we might not need to go to Azure or a cloud provider to understand this concept. It's more of a local thing we can understand. So dynamic is, let's say 192.168 and 1.14 is the last IP address assigned in our Wi-Fi or in our router. The moment you connect, it possibly will be the next free one, so that can be 15. And then if again you connect, connect the mobile, right, that's going to be 16, right? Now next time you shut down all, next day first you connect mobile, that gets the IP number 15, and the laptop connected later gets the IP number 16. But if you talk about static thing, and if I declare that, or if I state that my mobile will be always on 15 only, so it doesn't matter if I connect the mobile later to the laptop or prior to the laptop, it's going to be always 15, and laptop can be 16 or 14 or 17 based on the next availability slot, right? So that's kind of a differentiation between your dynamic and static IP address, right? Yep. So today we're gonna see that how we can create a virtual network in Azure portal, right? And then we try to create a virtual network with PowerShell. We see how that PowerShell can be addressed. So with that, I would like to pull out the Azure portal, And let me look at the, hold on a second, and yeah, so I think I still show the previous one. So yeah, I think you should be seeing my Azure portal. So the way is simple, right? I'll go to Azure, and this is my Azure subscription, right? And as you can see, in our previous session, we have created one resource group which is having storage account. So either we can click on create here, or we can search for virtual networks in here, or we can from the left hand side also you can try to search for it, right? So let me search for virtual. You see virtual network coming in, so we're going to click on that, and let me click on outside real quick, so that yeah, I think I need to go back to the home screen so that this pop-up doesn't come. Oh, I might need to reload the screen again. Yeah. So again, we're gonna, here also you can create a resource as well. So there are multiple ways to do the same thing in Azure, right? So I'll say virtual network, and when you say virtual network, there are plans, there are usages. So I'll not go to in detail. Just let's try to create one here, right? And once I create it, this is going to be asking a couple of questions. So for example, the subscription, I have only one, so it is defaulted. As there are multiple resource group, I'm going to create one here, and let's say I'd say name it Vnet, sorry, Vnet uh, Azure com demo 01, and I'm going to stick to EastUS, right? Next one is, if I go to next, you can see I can specify the IP address range space. What's going to be the IP address for that? And the default one is 24, right? And as I mentioned earlier, right, a virtual network is a combination of a couple of subnets, so it has to have a subnet by default, which is defaulted here, right? I can add one subnet, which I'm not going to do right now, but you can just look at adding a subnet if you need to, right? The next one is security, right? So bastion host, if I want to enable DDoS standard, and if you want to enable firewall, right now I'm not going to do anything. So but still, if I look at the bastion host, so bastion is kind of an advanced option, which, if you create a network that doesn't give you public internet access, bastion is like another layer which will create another network, and a VM, which will act like a jump box, and you can log into Azure and then access other network machine to bastion. So that's how the bastion concept is. And you can choose a public IP address as well, right? Now I'm going to disable this for now, and then if I going to enable DDoS plan, there's nothing. So that's another resource you buy in Azure. I'm going to click no, and that's how you can enable the DDoS protection as well. So let's disable that. If I enable firewall, right, so firewall is just adding one level of filtering on your network, right? And right now we're not going to do anything. Say disable, go to tags, and tags is a very basic feature, and that's basically used to, I'll say owner, right, and environment, development, and purpose, demo. So these are more of an identifier. Tag doesn't have to do anything over here. And next thing, if I click on review and create, all right, it's gonna quickly compile all the settings and tell us that whatever the input we have given, are they are good enough to create a you know create a virtual network. As you can see, validation passed, so we're gonna create it, right? Yeah, so I'll let the deployment happen here, right? And I could say deployment successful, right? And I'll go to resource. And as you can see, there are a couple of settings over here, right? And you know, you can look at the things over here in details. And activity log is basically activity log over here, what's happening, and that is going to show us there's nothing much happened because this is brand new, recently provisioned, right? And let us go to access control. Yeah, and this is basically shows the role assignment we have here, right? And this is obviously whatever is available, and you can add or remove anybody else here, right? So I'm going to skip tab and diagnostics. Let's go to address space. There is only one address space, which is 16, and then as you can see, this many addresses are here, right? So and by the time this comes in, let me have some questions. I could see there's quite a few here. Right? Okay, so we'll come back to there in a minute. So yep, so as you can see, number 16, right? So I'll quickly see. So let me quickly bring it up. I have one question before I go further. How to calculate the subnet, right? So there is a quick website, and then we can remember this. So let me go back, and for example, if I go to A, B, C, whatever class I choose, right? By default, it is /30. So I'm gonna change it. So let's say if I go to C, you can see these options here for 24 to 32. If I go to B, right, you can see even to 16, right? So if I click on 16 and try to calculate, right? So yeah, you can see total number, and then what's the range. You see this number, right? Number of hosts, number of usable host. So if I come back here, right, switch here, and 65 536, as you can see, right, this is the calculator. So this is a website you can use actually, but again, this is a little bit of study as well. So if you go by network class A, um, you can get, sorry, if you go to 16, right, as I talked about 32-bit, right, you get 32 to 24 backwards, right? If you go to B, you go till 16. You go to A, you get till 8, right? That many of the subnet based on the network class you are creating over here. And if I go any, it's still 1, right? So that's gonna be that's the way basically to calculate the numbers and how many subnets you have or subnets you can have, right? And that should be it. So this is basically for private IP address calculation, right? And the same thing is for it's on as I mentioned, IPv6 is more for the 64 thing. So we just click on calculate, right? And you see the numbers are really huge compared to IPv4, right? So and again, the way IPv6 is defined, it's on a hexadecimal, right? Wherein this is more of a decimal, so you get always 122.171.65.29, right? All binary, all, sorry, all numerical, all decimals, right? But here it is all on hexadecimal, right? So let me see if I can show you my quick demo, and then Yeah. So I'm gonna pull up my machine and then quickly show you. You just run this. Yeah. So I put ipconfig/on. I have a Ethernet adapter, and if you look at, this is my machine name, and this is my gateway. This is machine, and this is the DNS gateway. So if I want to access my router, I should be able to access with this, right? Because that's where the public access are redirected, right? Let me try and find out my actual IP address. You see, it's 168, sorry, 192.168.1.15. That is my private IP. So let's see if I have to, send some message from another computer connecting to my Wi-Fi to this computer which I'm sitting right now on. I should be using this IP address to talk to, right? So that was to way to identify the public, sorry, the private IP address over here, right? Let me see. And yeah, that's something I just wanted to show you because I've seen some questions. So yeah, now coming back to the demonstration part, right? So we have seen a vnet created with a subnet in here, right? We can go to connected devices, and we don't see any because there is nothing created over here, right? And then the next option is subnets, right? And as you can see, right, there's only one default subnet, and /24, right? 24 is so the calculation is something like, let me see. So it's like it's a simple calculation as you can do, right? I'll also tell you there are a couple of why it is 251 available, because there's already a couple of things internally assigned. But to calculate the total number of IP address, if I just come over here, let me quickly bring it up a notepad. So as I mentioned, IPv4 is 32, right? 32 minus we have /24. So if it's /24, so yeah, that's the number, right? Now we do it 2 to the power no, 8. So sorry for the wrong indentation. So the number comes around, if you do the calculation, the number is around 256, right? And there are 5 internet IPs, as I said, right? These are usable IPs. So same thing, if I look at my router, that starts with 192.168.1.1, right? But one is already assigned to my router. So same things over here, and that's where you can see 251. But the calculation is you should do a minus with 32 with whatever slash you have, and then make it of 2 power. So that's the calculation, you get it. And that's the formula in simple term, if you want to remember that. Yeah. Now, yeah, the next one is Bastion. And Bastion, as I mentioned, right, Bastion is more of a thing here that you can create Azure Bastion one, and then you can just move around, try to access all the resources within a Bastion host. So that is basically a lightweight VM, works at the jump box, so that you don't need to create anything. You don't need to create anything as another server to access existing network. You can just use that jump box, and that works on a browser over here. Yeah. So right now DDoS protection is disabled right now because that's how I created this, right? And the next one is firewall, that nothing exists. So let's create it in some time, right? I'm gonna click on Defender for Cloud, and then let's quickly skip it because that's another product in Microsoft, and then I don't think that is they have it here. So I go to Network Manager. Right now in this I can also see, right, connectivity configuration and then security admin configuration, right? What's there, what's not there. That's how we should talk about this. And the next one is DNS servers, right? And we can have our own custom DNS if our network structure is really really wrong, right, or big, or we can go by the default Azure provided. So Azure will handle the DNS routing of all the IP address and VNet things like that, right? And then as you can see, right, if you want to switch from default to custom, you definitely have to restart, because network has to be restarted and reconnected again through all your network interfaces, right? Let me say okay, because I have changed something which I'm not going to say. So vnet peering, vnet peering is a simple concept over here, which can be like, let's say you have on-premises network, on-premises vnet, and then you have Azure vnet, or within Azure also you have multiple vnets, right? You want to peer them so that the traffic between them can be interacted. So um, machine is one virtual sorry virtual machine 1 sitting in vnet 1 can talk to machine sitting in virtual machine 2 in vnet 2 can talk to each other if we do the right peering over here, right? So the next one is service endpoints, right? The service endpoint, as it says, if you really want to have a subnet dedicated, exported, that's how we try to expose service endpoints, right? And next one is private endpoints. So private endpoints right now we don't have here, so we have to enable it. So private endpoints are more of a setting a local DNS. So for example, if I just take a very native example, so if I want to access, if I build a similar website which is looking like Facebook and it is hosted in one of the private networks I am in, and if I do a host entry, right, that what will happen when I open my browser and type in facebook.com, instead of going to the actual facebook.com over internet, it will read my host file which is in my Windows machine, and then will go to the facebook.com custom application hosted in my private network, right? So that used to happen in a lot of cases earlier, yeah. So if you look at colleges, they have internal applications which is done through host entries, right? And then yeah, let's do it. So yeah, that was the thing around how do we make private endpoints, right? And then come back to properties. So properties is just basic summarization of what exactly to be done and what exactly is configured here right now. It comes with the name, it comes with the location it's in, and it comes with the resource group, resource ID, and resource group ID should be it, right? So the next one is obviously a common feature which all the Azure resources have. It's a lock, and you can actually, or you should be applying lock to the VNets, because one thing we can definitely control VNets through access, right, or access control, but applying lock on a VNet, or rather in any Azure resource, right? And as you can see, you can apply resource group lock, you can apply subscription lock, right? So lock will prevent accidental deletion. So if you're running a production workload, right, which is very sensitive, it may be recommended to have a lock over here, so that by accident, if someone does a typo, right, while executing command, there's no chance that this get deleted. You'll get a warning or get a blocker over there, right, to make sure that you avoid accidental deletes. The next one is the monitoring section, right? So it's more of a monitoring, and then if we enable monitoring for the VNet, right, we have to enable your diagnostic settings, and you can see alerts, right? And in alerts there are internal alerts, and you can set your custom alerts as well, right? So you can create an alert rule. For example, if I click on quickly here, right, so let's say I'll take, see, for all administrative operations or all anybody updates the virtual network, right? If we want a notification email, or if we want an alert, right, all those things can be also set associate accordingly within the vnet itself. So anybody touches your vnet in terms of configuration, right, network traffic is definitely one thing, but if someone try to tamper your vnet, right, that's where you should set an alert, and you should get an alert out of it that this is modified, right? So with that, I'll just quickly go back and then you know go to metrics, and metrics, I'll let it load, right? As you can see, we can select a couple of metrics, let's say failed ping vms, and right now you're not going to show and see anything, mostly because it's basically the vnet is only created, there's no resource tied to it, right? So yeah, that's the vnet thing, right? Now the next one is diagnostic settings, and that is like kind of setting up the monitoring if you want to. So either you can say vm protection or all metrics, right? So if I just click on this, right, you can say all logs, or you can say vm protection alerts. So both, one of the both, right, can be configured separately or together to send the data or diagnostic data to a log analytics workspace, so that you can monitor, or you can audit them separately later, right? So coming back to the previous one, and logs is obviously the logs what is set in diagnostics. Connection monitor, all right, so that's going to show you how many connections are there, and then if you want to click on try connection monitor, right, let's see. Yep, that's how it looks like. So we can create one and then try to create a connection monitor over here to test the connection, right? The next one goes is a diagram, right? We will quickly see what the diagram looks like. We will not see much because it's only the vnet, right? As you can see, right, the vnet and the subnet, this is only two things over here. There's nothing much at all created. So as and when the topology grows, right, in network terminology we call topology because it's always a hierarchy. Network is always a hierarchy, right? So that's where you could see two here, and then when we grow here we can see more. And automation is something if you want to write a task or you want to explore a template, and the rest of the things are troubleshooting, right? So with that, the next thing we're going to create is a virtual machine and try to attach it to VNet, right? In the meantime, if you have any questions, so please feel free to have. And I also quickly look at your chat for any questions. Yeah. I got one interesting question here, that can we I mean, does vnet peering requires both side connectivity peering to be initiated? So I'd say no for that, because if I just click on this vnet, right, let me go to the peerings and try to add one. Right now we don't have another vnet, but as you can see, right, we can just set up another virtual network. I can obviously do some of the previous one. Test vnet link 01. I'm gonna click, you can deploy, and these are settings what you want to do: block traffic, block vm access, and click on add. All right, now what happened, I want to click on add. Okay, peering link name is missing. 00. Let's try to add. it's adding. So we can see it's once it's added, how it's connected, right? Yeah. So I have another server setup within a VNet over here, right? Which I have created earlier. So right now the gateway transit is disabled, and then it is still updating. That means it is processing. And the best way to look at is the right hand side corner notification. All right, it's at added, and then the status is still updating. Would quickly create it. Yeah. So yeah, you can see it's connected. All right. So let me go to this and the peerings. You can see that, right? So for both the VNet, irrespective of any way you create it, it's gonna get updated in both the VNet peering settings, right? So that's how it is. You can anyway choose any of them and then try to do the VNet peering over here, right? Now let's come back to the slide once again and try to present it. But yeah, feel free to have any question, and Ritik, if you could help me out, if I miss any question, please feel free to pick me up for that. So yeah, I'd say let me share my screen again.
Hi,
Guys,
hi, Samik.
please
Yeah,
can you see my screen again? I think there was a quick drop. Yeah, thanks.
yeah. Now it's visible.
Thank you. Yeah, so next one is the VNet, and yeah, I'd agree with Gaurav, and thanks for answering it in detail, Gaurav, that you can do it through portal and then it automatically happens for both the VNets. So let me see. Yeah. So the next one is configuring your NSGs. So NSG is kind of network security group. So those are kind of logical groups, right? And then we can look at how do we create NSGs and then configure them and apply a bunch of rules around NSGs, right? So it's like if you want to have a particular set of rules, those are things can be applied, prioritize, and all those details can be looked at in NSG rules, right? So now let's look at the implementation of the groups. So we can create an NSG group, right? And then and the purpose of NSG is like to limit, or I would say to specify what is going to be what is going to be the access control points for that particular network, right? For example, if we have a NSG, right, stop all the public networks, something like that, right? And it can be definitely associated to a particular subnet, right, a rule, and or it can be associated with multiple subnets or network interface card, and it can be associated multiple times as well, right? So we'll try to look at a demo on this by creating a virtual machine and see how much we can associate to, right? And as you can see in the group, we can basically define the inbound security rules and the outbound security rules, right? What's going to be there, NST1, NST2. So there can be multiple rule with the order. So if you define something with a higher order, or sorry, or the lower order, right, that takes precedent on the higher order as well. So let's say if we are provisioning a VM, right, we don't want an internet connectivity over there, so we block all outbound, but we still have to access the virtual machine from a local machine, right? In that way we have to allow it. So let's look at how they are independent. So it can be applied, as I mentioned, it can be applied to a NIC particularly, or it can be applied to a subnet as well, and there can be multiple NSGs applied on the same resource, right? So let's look at how we can add a NSG. So NSG can cover anything like from accessing your RDP port or for accessing your Windows port or any other UDP port, or there are different various categories we're gonna look at in a demo, right? So next one is kind of a demo. Let me try to look at again and then see if I can show you the portal. Yeah, this is the VNet. So I'm gonna let me try to create a small virtual machine. So I'll click on create and then click on virtual machine, right? And okay, it's gonna take a while. And once you create that, right, there's a bunch of settings as you can see, right? So the default subscription is defaulted here, right? And if I click on the right resource group which you're using right now, and I'd say, test win VM 01. So one, so availability zone, let's keep it no infrastructure redundancy because this is just for a demo. And then I'm gonna go to Windows. Let's go for a 2016 data center because yeah. And the moment I change it, right, and you will definitely learn more about this in the upcoming sessions as well, that we can change it to multiple tiers and then things like that. So let me see if I can. So I'll try to create something new, Azure Com user, and then let's type in the password, which I'm not gonna tell you. Yeah, I'll try to keep password really simple. Yeah. So there are certain characters if you look at hover on the password and then you have to confirm, and then yeah, and you cannot go definitely by administrator and things like that, right? So I'd say select inbound ports. I have selected only specific, so that this will allow your IP address to access your virtual machine, because this is required, because 3389 is the port when you take a remote desktop connection to a machine. That's where you do it. Next, I'm going to go to disk. So we will go with basic, no change. In the networking, right, as you can see, it automatically picked up the demo one I created, right? And it's going to be there in the same subnet which is default there, and it is also creating a public IP address, right? You can create your own, but I'll let it create on its own default. So nick security network NSG here, right? So if I create NSG here, I'm gonna go to by a basic NSG, and again here also I specify only public selected port is 3389, right? Delete public IP and nick when VM is deleted. Yeah, so I'm not gonna do that right now because I'm gonna do it later. Manual cleanup, right? You can do a load balancing as well if you already want to do that through Azure Load Balancer. Again, if I do that, right, it asks me to select a load balancer, which I do not have right now. But again, the load balancer can be attached also to a network, right? So I'm going to go to none, and let's go to management, right? So now boot diagnostics, these are like enable with managed storage account, which is recommended. I'm not going to change any default settings over here. Enable auto shutdown, let it be on 7 p.m. Let's try to disable, because if it's searched during the demo, that's not good. So I'm gonna uncheck that, and we don't need a backup, and we go to advanced next. And if you really want to install an extension, so extensions are more of software. So if I click on that, let me show you a couple of extensions here. So these are kind of extension you can create in the VM, and then I'm going to go back, which we are not going to do that, and enable user data. Let's not do anything around this. Host group capacity reservation, I don't want to go anything uh, beyond that. So let's do the same tag again. Environment is development, and owner is it's me, and then I'm gonna say purpose is demo, right? And I'm gonna click on next. So what happens over here is the moment I click on next, right, this is going to show me that whatever selection we have done, right, like starting from creating or naming the VM to enabling the port and attaching to a particular vnet and subnet, right, and also provisioning a public IP address. So that has couple of steps, and then it also ensures that I don't do I mean I don't miss out any specific step over here, right? Once I review and create it, let me see if I can create that. Yeah, so it's gonna take a while because behind the scene it's validating, are the pricing tiers right, are the network equipments, whatever I have given input is correct. So again, you have said, see, there's a warning as well because I'm trying to provision a VM. Again, this VM is because it's for demo purposes. We are doing it this way, but this is again not a good practice to enable RDP port because I'm directly having a public, port opening for the VM with the public IP. So that means if someone can, have the password I've given and the username I'm provided, right, and with this IP they can easily log in, right? So I can create over here, and the moment I create here, and for this is very particular for Azure and specifically for administrators, right? I'd say you see always keep an eye on the notification because that's going to tell us, right, it's initial in the deployment. So the deployment is starting and it will submit the deployment, and once the deployment is complete we have another notification saying that the deployment is complete, right? So let me close that, and then you can see it's still moving, and then it's continuing, and all the screens are grayed out, right? So with that, I'll just give some time back to you all for any questions you have. Feel free to paste it in the chat. I'm seeing that directly so that I can answer it right away. Any questions? Okay, so as you can see, deployment is still in progress. So though we can see all the great ticks, but there's still something getting created. Yeah. So in the meantime, let me quickly have a look at firewall and virtual networks. Yep. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
Samik, there is one question
Yeah. Sure.
from chat box. Can you please let us know formula to get how many IPs we can use?
Uh-huh. Okay. So that was a small formula, right? So let me try to get that. There are two ways. One, let me see if I can pull out the site again. Yeah. So there's a website called this one, calculator.net, right? You can calculate it here. You can select what kind of subnets you want and just click on calculate, right? And that's going to give you, so if I go by what happened, okay, you have to go back, and then if I go by, let's say 32, right, it's going to be only one possibly. Yeah, you can see number of host one because 32 is the highest one. So the formula is like, if I just open the notepad and bring it up here, so IPv4 is a 32-bit address, right? So you say 32 minus whatever you see, 32 or 24. Let's say if I go for 24, right? So the if I do a minus, that becomes 8. So the total number actually will be 2 into 2 to the power 8. So that comes as 256. So that's where the ideal number is. But once we create it, right, anyway, subnet and the configuration of the vnet itself, they need to have some ip reserved for the internal purposes or the for entire mechanism to work, right? So for that, if you can come to azure, right, I'll just skip it and then come back here, or maybe I'll try to use the same website over here again and then quickly change it to 31 or 24, right? So you see number of host is 256 and number of usable is 254 ideally, right? That means the first one is the device which is hosting this. For example, if we talk about a router, the router, and one is the gateway, right? These are the two things taken by default. So we guessed rest of the usable host. That's how we do the calculation, right? And then C is the last one, right? 2 to the power till 24 to 32. If I go to B, the same thing goes for 16, right? And A is if I go to 8, and if I go any, it's like goes from 0. Yeah, that's the calculation. Hope I was able to give you an understanding of how it should be calculated.
Yes, Samik. There
Yeah,
is one more question, Samik. If we
yeah,
allow RDB port while creating
mhm.
VM, can it be blocked using NSG? Or if we do not allow RDB port while creating VM, and can it be allowed
Yeah.
using NSG?
That's a great question, and I'm going to cover this in the demo I'm sharing right now. So
Okay,
let's go to the virtual machines. Okay, I'll go for virtual machines, and this is the machine I created, right? So if I go to networking of the machine, and it's gonna take a while to load. If I look at this, and then you see the network inbound and outbound, by default it is, because we have check the checkbox allow, right? It is allowed. So if I just click on that, right, I can actually change it to even rdp and source port ranges. If I can change it to deny, that's one thing we can do, right, and save it. So it'll close the that particular port as well. Now I can as well delete that. Let me say okay over here. I can as well delete this piece, delete this rule. That means any rules can be added. Like I can add an inbound rule, I can delete an inbound rule, everything. And same goes for outbound rule as well. And in case we are using application security gateway and load balancer, this is the configuration. Now, one more thing to understand, because we are talking about a virtual machine, right? You can see the NIC has a public IP and a private IP. So now, let's say if I create another virtual machine, right, and then attach it to the same VNet, right? Yeah, thanks Gaurav again for doing the right calculation. So, so what happens is, if I go to a private, it is 10.1.0.4, right? Now if we have another VM created, right, and that IP address, internal IP address or private IP address is zero point 0.5, right, they can talk to each other without going through the internet route, right? So that's the fundamental of getting the VNet and then tagging the resources over there. Now because I have enabled it, let me try to take a public connection here. So I'm going to go to rdp, and this is my RDP connection. Let me see if it has configured me correctly, right? And I click on connect. So it is trying to connect, and we'll see where the data comes in. It's more choices, use a different account. And I'm trying to connect. say virtual machine, and you see it's, let's see if it connects, right? And I'm going to show you this. See, I'm able to log into the virtual machine, right? So that's one quick thing I'd say. And I'll wait it for, or let's close this one now, right? So we disconnected, right? And then again, let me go back to Azure. I will go back to networking, and in the networking, we go to the RDP port, right? And just say deny this, save it, right? Once we save it, yeah, let's try to do the same thing again. I'm gonna log into the same, I'm going to try to log into the same virtual machine. So connect and download RDP file, click on the file, yeah, and this is going to be here, and you put it here, and I'll let it open, and then maybe it might not, you see this is the error I got. Let me bring it up to here. So that means the moment I changed that rule, right, it just turned it off and then made sure that that access is nobody allowed. I mean, never allowed again. Yeah. So that was the way, and then let me get it back and make it allow, save it, and let's see if I can go to connect and go to RDB file, right, and then click on the file and come here, click on connect, and let's see more choices. Yeah, my you see this is connected now, right? So that's kind of the difference and how we should be using this. Let me bring it up again here. Yeah, so the machine is up now. Yeah, and you see the same IP address here. So that was basically a quick demo on how you can configure VNet in a machine and then things like that. Again, I have another question. There is a concept of IP whitelisting where a specific public can be allowed and accessed the VM by RDP. That could be a best practice. So ideally, if you talk about best practice, I would agree with that. But alongside, there's something like without even whitelisting and blacklisting, right? There's a concept of bastion. So bastion is, if we configure bastion is something, it creates another virtual machine, right, to the low resource in the same VNet, right? So, and that opens as a browser, so it never gets connection to your desktop or to your machine to the VM. You always connect to the bastion works in a web browser version, and then bastion connects to that particular machine. So your machine is totally having outside cutoff. So that's, I would say, the best thing from a security standpoint. Yeah. Now let's come back to the one, and I'd say let's look at the one where I left. Yeah. The next one is creating Azure policies, right? So Azure policies is something which needs, like, for example, you want to make sure that nobody can create. Right now, I created a VM wherein I was allowed to enable port 3389, right? Remote desktop protocol port, right? Or I may be, if I'm creating a virtual Linux machine, I am allowed to create a 22 port opened machine, right? So we can create Azure policies. Policies is more of a Azure governance part, which basically deployed can be deployed at a, maybe subscription level. Now with the policy compliance, if you try to create anything outside of policy, so for example, a policy can be, always make sure that you have a dedicated vnet for each VM, or you have this port blocked over here. All those things can be a part of the policy, and then that can be enforced in the subscription. So anybody try to create something beyond the policy, those are kind of a rule. So not able to create anything outside that scope, right? That's what the policy is built for. And we can assign a total a bunch of policies is a cost, called as kind of an initiative. We can have an initiative as well as a policy. Or maybe another example can be, if you have all your offices in your east us area, right? You know, to make sure that nobody creates a virtual machine which is totally outside the east us region. So that's where we can assign a policy with east us region, so nobody even able to create a virtual machine outside the east us region. So that's the fundamental of having policies over here, right? Now next one is, getting the virtual networking and then configuring the firewall, right? And firewall is basically, we can have Azure firewall in place, which we have seen in bits, right? um, while we're trying to create a virtual network. So firewall is basically, if you look at a windows machine, right, you can have a firewall, and in your firewall you can allow certain things like make a allow rule, and that allow can be url, that allow can be ip address, and you can set your inbound outbound traffic. That's where a firewall stands for, right? Now just to look at a broader perspective of using a firewall cases, right? For example, you have a particular segment of Azure, right, where only developers work, or where the data is very very secure, right? You don't want to have them over internet, so you can just layer them all the virtual machine or all the networks through a Azure Firewall, to make sure that there is no traffic in, outbound. That means nobody is able to talk to internet from those machines, right? And even from the inbound perspective, you can also specify either these are the IP addresses, or these are the host, or maybe there are specific criteria we can define only for inbound rules. So they are like total lockdown area, right? I got another question. Is the another Azure policy generator tool? Okay, so just allow me a moment to finish this slide. I'll quickly jump on, because there is really a good bunch of policies available, right, which you can uh, leverage, right, to basically create your policies. And there are a lot of community driven policies available as well, right? So yeah, coming back to this, so whenever we are enabling firewall, and firewall means it has to be traffic, and then the audit comes into picture, right? We can enable audit in our firewall, so that we can have all our firewall logs into a logging system, to make sure that who is trying to access the firewall, who is trying to break the firewall, and things like that, right? Okay, so let's look at this. Look at the next one, right? Go to the next one. And obviously, when you talk about networking, DNS is another part, right? Let's say you want to host something custom in Azure, which is supported by Azure DNS, right? We can have a private DNS zone. We can have a private DNS. Basically, you can put up a whole DNS server in Azure, and then maintain all your DNS stuff and IP networking and DNS resolution thing within Azure itself, right? So that's something we should be able to do it through the Azure DNS feature, right? And that obviously goes hand in hand with Azure virtual networks, right? Now and then when you do go for DNS, right, so it has to be, or it can be like, you can create a directory. You can, once you create a directory, right, you can have your domain. So right now everybody might not have a domain, but in terms of organization, right, when they set up a trust, say, so what they do is they set up the domain in Azure, right, and tie it to Azure Active Directory, and then set up the DNS to make sure all the resolution is done in Azure itself, right. Yeah. So that was some sort of identity and custom domain sections available, right. And then if some of you, or many of you who have handled domains earlier, right, so either we go to vendors like GoDaddy to buy a domain, right. So whoever is a domain provider, they, based on the type of domain, or if it is like an email domain or email server, or if it is a DNS domain alone, right, we have something like a text record or a MX record, right. Herein, for a domain, we can just verify it through a text record. So it means that GoDaddy is basically trusting Azure to host the domain services on behalf of them. So initially, when you buy a domain, we have to go through the service providers, and then we can tie to Azure domain, and that's where the verification happens through your text record or MX record, which is very very unique to each domain, right? And then we can configure it through the domain particular vendor portal, right? And within, obviously, in Azure. And DNS, whenever we talk about DNS has multiple zones. You have internal zone and in public private. All the zones can be also configured whenever you're trying to configure DNS in Azure, right? And for the same name, we can have different multiple zones available, right? We can have a parent domain registered. We can point it to the Azure NS, and then we can have a subdomain, and then things like that, right? So that's what the domain thing is works. So and when you do that, right, once the domain setup is done, it's there, the trust is there, and then you can just update your, as I mentioned, you can just update that through basically your GoDaddy MX record, or any other vendors you are using for, right. And yeah, if you want to have subdomains, if you want to have any other domains, you can always have a text record. You can always have DNS records and things like that, right. And let's say once we tie the DNS, and once the setup is done, right, you can actually join your virtual machines to a domain. So it happens so that you have the domain set up in your Azure, and the VM is also there in Azure. You can assign a particular name to the VM, right? For example, if I say my host virtual machine .abc.com, right? So the virtual machine can be accessible through that name also, instead of, as long as you're in the privatized network, instead of having or connecting a VM through IP address, you can actually tie to a host name as well, right? So let's say mydave.abc.com, right? And you can use your domain credential to log into it. So that's how the thing works. And then you can always obviously control the external network through that, right. Now, if we talk about the DNS determining the private zone scenarios, we can, as I mentioned, right, we can have one VNet or multiple VNet, and then the VNet can query back to the DNS zone records and do a name resolution, and then let you connect to that particular thing. So let's say you type in, let's say you have a VNet in your organization, right? mydevvm and .abc.com, right? So when you type in that, your Azure DNS reads that, and it basically gives the IP of the machine back, and then that IP is definitely the private IP, and then you are connected to the VM through that way, right? So yeah. DNS, obviously you can have the DNS resolution, and then as I mentioned, we can, if we have a particular domain, or if you have a domain, I mean, if you have a domain registered with name, you can try this option like creating the domain in Azure, and then setting the DNS record, so that you can have the website, you can have the domain servers, you can have it AD hosted, AD synchronized, right? And also your DNS records, based on the DNS records tying, and at the registration, you can have your virtual machines or all of the resources type up to that, right? So yeah. Oh, that was again around the DNS zones. Before I move further, I'd say again I'll take a pause here for any question you have. Let me see if we have any questions. Well, I can see a question as well as answers as well. So I'll just like to pick up the question, and then it's like how Azure Firewall becomes a stateful and stands out from the NSGPs. I can see, the answer from Gaurav, and then again I'd appreciate that it was a great answer that it is managed as a part of service offering. So just to give an example, let's say you have something in firewall, you might need to restart the VM or restart the service, and that's because that's a part of the service, right? It has a lot of other coverages which NAG do not have, as you can see. And if we talk about the quick thing about NSGs, it works on the fly, right? And that's why quick change in NSP might reflect better or earlier. But if we talk about firewall, it's more of a, it has more coverage in terms of your external blockage. And NSG is more of a yes no rule, I would say, wherein firewall is a bunch of configuration which not only controls the configuration, it also makes sure that you are safe and protected from your external threats, right? If someone is trying to do a denial of service attack or things like that, yeah. And another threat protection, right? If someone is trying to inject something to your firewall, so that's the first level of defense, I would say, compared to the NSG. Yeah. Right. And another question we have is, how can I combine two resources in a single IO policy? Well, we don't combine resources. What we could do is we do a policy assignment, right? So whenever we try to assign a policy, we can assign it to a resource group, and anything and everything falls in the resource group or maybe in the subscription, the policy gets applied through that. And policy has conditions. You can let me try to quick at see if I can show you policies over here. Yeah. So let's look at the definitions. So I'll let it load. You can see there's a bunch of them. Configure service account should disable public network access, right? Let's open this up. And if I try to look at the definition, it is a effect policy, it's an audit, and where is it? Indexed parameters, cognitive service. Okay, that's the bad choice. Maybe I would say Missy IP address, or let's search for network, right? Configure data factory to disable public network access. That's a nice one, right? So it's a display built-in name, description, and you see all of factories, all of public network access. So you see where the policy rule applies, right? So if you really want to expand, one way is you apply at a subscription level. All the data factories are getting applied, and you can tweak around this if condition, right? If then condition, you can actually cascade them to have their policies, and that's how you expand a policy. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's look at the next one on the policies. I'll quickly jump back to the slide again in shortly, but let me see if I can have policies managing two resources. So I would say in that case, right, the best thing is obviously we can try to make a policy complex, but I would say if you really want to do something in same thing in two different resources, right, so it's better to have two separate policies and tie them to a initiative, and then you can actually assign them both. So what will happen in that case, the flexibility is you can assign it to any level, and the track will be easier if the policy fails, right? Let's say you combine two things in the same policy, right, and then that policy fails, it's a cumbersome effort to find out what failed. Is it the first resource or the second resource, right? So something around that. And obviously I can I can suggest you uh, how can you create multiple resources, or target multiple resources in the same policy, so shouldn't be an issue. So for example, if you look at tags, let me look at tags, right? uh, Require tag values on resources. Yeah. So see, this is basically for policy rule. If the field is not tag, right, so this is then deny. So that means this is a policy for all, right? So similar to that, it's just a play of the if condition over here to assign it to multiple resource types, right? So that's how it should be here. And another one we have, how to create SMTP relay to use scan email. So now again, where we want to create a SMTP relay, that's another service or a server which can be tied to your DNS, or maybe yeah, and create a server which supports SMTP and then enable SMTP feature, and then try to enable all the features to scan the mail. But I would say if we are using if you're not using on premises, if you're using Microsoft products like M365 or Office 365, right, the software as a service itself has a lot of features to enable mail scanning, and then on hold discovery, and then data loss protection features, which is like SaaS offering, right? Those are can be achieved over there. And if you still want to if you have a hard condition of having your own SMTP server or email server, you can obviously do it by setting it through Azure server, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so if it's an Office 365, it is, you don't need to create scan email over there. There's a product called Microsoft Defender for Office, right? You just enable that product, right, for automation. So what happens is in Office 365, it has a product called Microsoft Defender for Office. There you can set in your policies for mail scanning, right? So that's the easiest way, and that's more of a configuration over here. So that's little outside Azure, I would say, but again, that's a part of cloud. So coming back to let us, for the interest of time, let us quickly run through the content today, and then we can jump off to the question again if we have. And I'm definitely happy to extend on. Yep. So the next one we talked about is, or we'll be talking about is network traffic management. And as we know, right, either it's internal application, then the internal load balancer. If it is external application, then external load balance. There should be something, right, which manages the traffic. Now to look at that, we should look at the, how do we configure the routing, or how do we configure the network traffic or the load balancing. For example, right, so in on premises, if you heard of proxy systems, right, uh, proxy systems over there or proxy servers, wherein there are multiple offices, but office A might need more internet bandwidth than office B. So all those things are routed to the right proxy servers, which enable them to have the internet access and the routing stuff there. So let's say if you talk about routing, a fundamental example can be if I type in Azure portal.azure.com, right? And if I'm sitting in a corporate network, now it depends on the corporate network's routing, that through which proxy server will I be getting. But rather, if I sitting in my home office, right, and then if I try to access, it is more of my router which is responsible to manage the routing, right? And then we can obviously have custom routing tables over there, and then we can have an example how it works. All right, now, and once we have this, right, it can be through, like, it totally depends on your infrastructure configuration, and then how do we communicate. So for example, if you have data centers in your organization, as well as you want to talk to Azure, right, there can be multiple ways. So we have VPN gateways, right? We can have express route, we can have site to site VPN, right? So these are a couple of examples to make sure your route is from correctly. Now there are cases, right? If a company is trying to maintain a scenario which is hybrid, they have some of the offices in on premises, but some of the things in Azure. Now either they go by they make sure that all their on premises resources, they'll never have access to Azure, so that's fine, there's no channel needed, there's no VNet needed. But they want to have all their networks, and there has to be a subnet, there has to be peering between their on premises and their Azure network. They have to have site to site VPN for the communication, right? And they can have express route also. Now again, the next thing is, let's say if you are in an on premises network, and if you are having in a on premises network, for example, let me quickly go to the next. So let me go to the next one, right slide here. Yeah. So I'm going to get to the right slide over here so that I can take it from there. Yeah. So just to give an example, right? In your on-premise scenario, if you want to access Azure, you can go through site-to-site VPN. You can go through Express Route, whatever way you choose to. Now, if you want your on-premises network to be open to internet as well as to Azure, to make sure that all your networks which are accessing Azure resources should be routed through the Express Route or site-to-site VPN, right? Or whatever is internet, that should be through your firewall, right, over internet. So that's kind of a thing which are maintained in the routing table, I would say, in the virtual network, right? So hopefully we should be able to see something quickly if we can finish it off early. So there are things which are system defined, and there are things like which are user defined. So for a fact that one office has a heavy workload on a Friday or a Thursday, right? You can actually define, on a particular day or a particular office setup, wherein you can define, based on as a user, you can define the route as well, right? And you can if you want to really examine something, you can just apply a virtual appliance, and then you can add a route, add a subnet, and that's how you can test it out. So let's say if you have a public subnet, and you can have a routing table managing the public subnet, you can have virtual appliances sitting in your DMZ zone, and that can talk to your private subnet. So that's how it can be managed as well, right? Now, custom routing tables is like, we just seen no the IP subnetting on subnet ABC, right? So C is like the last one, and then we can get a routing table, we can add a routing, or we can have everything custom on top of the previous or existing one, right? So And the next part is more of connecting and configuring your network routing and endpoints, right? Through internet or over a VPN. So just an example, as I mentioned earlier, right? So you can have a virtual machine within Azure or within on premises, right? And all your on premises data or appliances or systems can talk to Azure through express route, right? And within Azure, they can be in the same VNet, they can talk to each other, and the firewall can protect over the internet, right? That's how the full setup is expected to be, right? The next one, we need to see Azure load balancer, and when you talk about load balancer, that's just to make sure that that's going to be a front end service or server which is making sure that where to send the request based on the incoming needs, right? Now, to configure that, we have to understand how many users are going to use the service, or the IP address, or maybe the host name, right? And then we implement that public load balancer, and accordingly we also define which queue it is based on the kind of user load or concurrent user, things like that. And we can create a back and push later, and then we can also configure Azure load balancer rules, and then we need to make sure the session persistence. So session persistence is something a little unique. To give an example, if we are just talking about, or let's say, I am a user A, and I am just trying to access to some application through load balancer. It sends me to server A, right? And then for some of the other reason, my next request goes to same, it goes to server B, or it might not go to server A or something like that. So the load balancer makes sure that the session is persistent across my two requests. It's not that broken and the data connection is not lost, right? So that's something, I'd say. And to determine, we just see load balancing rules, wherein we should go, it should be internal or it should be public. And then it can be obviously done for both scenarios, inbound and outbound. And it can also make rules and make sure the healthiness of the load balancing and the resources behind that, right? So that's how it should be. And fundamentally, when I do that, the public load balancer is having a, for example, if we take a standard web application concept, right? We have a couple of VMs over here, and then the network load balancer takes a request from the internet, right, which is possibly done by user, right? And that sends to the right virtual machine based on the kind of configuration rules and the load we have configured it for, right? Now, determine load balancer skews. So this is obviously, there are a couple of things and couple of features which are available. So if we go by basic and standard, so the backend pool can be having up to 300 instances, or the standard can be various 1000. And the healthy probe can work on TCP HTTP, and the standard one is HTTPS. So if you want to have a healthy probes on HTTPS, right, you should be going on standard one. Availability zone is not available right on the basic one, but there is like a couple of availability zone available on the standard one as well. Now in talking about the front ends, we can have inbound only, and then standard one can have inbound outbound both, right? And what is secure by default? Be sure is open by default, and NSG is optional, and the standard one is closed to inbound unless you have an NSG defined to do that, right? And then obviously when you talk about standard, it has a dedicated defined SLA, wherein basic doesn't come with a SLA over here, right? Now, if you really want to create a backend pool, that's something once you create the load balancer, right? And we can define the basic as well as standard skews for backend as well. So whatever we do, the virtual machines get scaled up, and then the availability set, or it's a single virtual machine, all the configuration can be done using backend pool over here, right? So, and fundamentally, we can also create Azure load balancer rules, right? The rules are like as simple as the NSG rule. So right, but still they can have the flexibility to go to which healthy probe they want to go to. Do you want to have the session persistency? What should be the idle timeout? Things like that are also added and available here as a part of rule, right? And just to talk about persistence. So if you really want to have session persistence, right, and as I talked about this, so we can configure the persistence level. So it has to be on client IP, it can be on client IP and protocol. So if I am using the same IP address, right, for example, when I talk about my router, right, my router has one public IP, and then if I'm trying to make one request from mobile and then one request from my laptop, so both can be persistence if we have done it on a client IP level. And because my router is having a single public IP address, the protocol is depending on what type of access you're trying to do, it's UDP or something else, right, along with the client IP. That's how the persistence is configured, right? Now the next one, I'm just little going little faster to make sure that we try to complete everything. But yeah, feel free to have any questions. If not now, I'll definitely try to answer to you as soon as possible. So the next one is configure your application gateway. And then again, whenever I talk about gateway is a similar concept of routing and then having some components around it, right? So the example is, if you really have a app gateway which will have a dedicated IP address, right? So you make a request from a browser, the app gateway listens to it, and there's a HTTP listener, and then there's a settings around that. And it can be actually it can be spanned across the virtual machine scale set, and even in your based on the your network configuration, it can talk to your on-premises server as well, right? Now the next one is configuring the application gateway routing, right? So if we talk about routing, we have the application gateway as well as the firewall, right? The web application firewall. And then we can definitely route you know uh, a particular folder. For example, we talk about a web application, right, which is hosted in multiple servers, which streams images as well as video, for example, right? That can be routed to separate setup image pools, right, or servers. The same thing goes for if the same application gateway is managing multiple site routing, right? It can be like different websites or different URLs can be accessed through or routed through different servers, right? And there are a couple of things to set up. And again, and this is more of a, I would say this is more of a planning part also involved here to set up an application gateway concept here. So we need to decide what's the front end IP, and our DNS registration or our host name registration will be happening on that. So let's say if you want to have abc.com, right? So you have to have the front end IP registered, and that IP has to be assigned to the front end load balance server or gateway server, right? And then there'll be a listener will have listen to the port for which the request is coming, and it will also make sure it does the SSL offloading, right? Once the SSL offloading is done, that means it will unload the HTTPS and then try to read out the actual request. And then based on the rule we configure, right, either it will be like going to site based routing, or a path based routing, and to the right backend pool, right? And that's where I'd say to configure application gateway is. So I think that was a summary of the presentation, right? So yeah, so that was a little faster, I know. And then again, I like to take a time here and give it to you, so that if you have any questions, please feel free to have them on. And I'll quickly look at the questions if there are any. Guys, feel free to remind if I missed any questions, or always reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to have it more clear. Yep.
Yeah, there are two questions, Samik, on in chat box.
Okay. Nice question. When to use web application firewall and when app gateway? So the purposes are a little different, right? Firewall, as you know, firewall is more of a security statement, I would say, to block things, right, where you can see what to come and what to filter. And app gateway is more of a thing to route. So the purposes are a little different, I would say, for web application firewall and app gateway, right? Yep. And let me look at the next one. Can you explain the ssl offloading? So basically what happens when you use a route, right? Before you apply the route, most cases, all the routing or all the request has to, I mean, recommended to go through ssl, right? So that means, let's say if I hit request to any of the application which is load balanced or having gateway installed for that, I will be running on, I'll be making a request on HTTPS, right? That means that is encrypting my request and sending it to that server. So that encrypted request cannot be routed internally. So that has to be offloaded, decrypted, and then that offloading has to happen within the gateway server. And then it, based on the route table, it will actually reroute to the actual, particular nodes. So that means the node need not to have the ssl over here. The ssl has to be configured at the gateway or at the load balancer server, right? And yeah, another one, app gateway and load balancer. Okay, we have a tier of, yep. We see.
So we are going to take one last question. What is the difference between application gateway and load balancer?
Okay, so let me just try to answer you. You one quick second. Is my audio clear? Oh, again,
Yes, you are audible.
so the, yeah, thanks. So basically the fundamental difference, I would say, for the load balancer, it works with, layer 4 at traffic basically, right? And then application gateway works with specifically https including the WebSocket. So it's more of a layer it connects to, and the network layer it uses. That's the difference. So it, depending on what exactly you are wanting to route, right? If you really want to route the traffic at layer 4, you go for Azure load balancer. But if you really want to do it at layer 7, right, specifically at https or at a WebSocket level, which is higher on the network topology, or I would say OSI framework, right, that's where you use application gateway. So that's the fundamental difference, and that's how we choose, yeah. And also I'd say, yeah, load balancer is just like, if you have one single application, you can route it to them. But if you talk about app gateway, as it is running on a different protocol, right, it is letting you choose the load balanced, sorry, I think path based load balancing as well.
So here we end our question. This was really excellent, Samik. I hope
Thank
everyone
you.
doubts are cleared now. I would like to thank Samik for such an informative session. I am sure that all participants gain knowledge via this session will sincerely assist them in their career opportunities. Thank you, Samik, for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone, and yeah, thank you to the organizers to have a great session planned, and then thank you everyone again for joining on a Saturday evening.
Thanks a lot, Samik.
Have a nice day, nice weekend.
Yeah. So now I would like to call Saurav Raghuvanshi to announce our week 2 challenge winner. Sorry, week 3 challenge winner.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, Saurav, you're audible.
Thanks, Ritik. So let me just share my screen.
I hope everyone is excited for week 3 winners.
Yeah, just confirm once if is my PPT visible.
Yes, Saurav, it's
Okay.
feasible.
So hello everyone. Once again, I'm here. So I hope you are not getting bored by seeing me again and again. So yeah, so we are completed with the week 2 challenge. Sorry, week 3 challenge. Let me just go through that part. I hope you all have know that this was the winner for week 2. We already announced that, and this was the week 3 challenge that we had. And just before going to the result, couple of things. First thing is make sure from the next week onward, make sure to submit your blog before 12 p.m. On the Friday. Before, we also need couple of time to go through all the blogs and choose for the winners. So this is the only restriction we have. So it will be very much great if you publish your blog or submit your blog before Friday itself or by the mid of Friday, so that we can have at least a 24-hour frame to choose the winner. So now it's the time for announcing the winner, but I would not do that until we see some excitement in the chat. Can we have are you guys excited for the result? Yeah, that's great. That's great. So just to reiterate, this is not the final winner only. So every week we are going to have a winner, and those who have submitted their blog on Friday, their blog will be considered for the next week challenge also. So don't worry if you submitted on Friday. So just I wanted to keep that we are not evaluated that blog for this result. This result is announced only the blog that have submitted till 12 p.m. on Friday itself. So now we're time for winner. So here are 7 winners for this week. Once again, congratulations to everyone who won this challenge for week 3. Soon, someone from our team will be reaching out to you for your address to get the goodies delivered. Just to reiterate on a couple of things. First thing is that those who are winning the challenges, they still have to write the blogs or whatever challenges we are giving for other opportunity that we have, whether it's like the certification voucher or goodies from Whizlabs, subscriptions, Whizlabs passes and everything. So for that, you have to keep on contributing. And those who didn't want till now, just keep contributing. We have the data. We are picking people who are writing blog in a repetitive way each week. So definitely you can we wish that definitely your name will be coming in the upcoming result announcement, because it is just a week 3 result. We have till week 8, right? So and we have an ample number of resources, goodies and everything. So I'm expecting that definitely everyone is going to win this uh, whatever the giveaway we are giving. So just coming to week 4 challenge, it is quite similar to the week 3 challenge, but just to make sure this week you don't have to go through all the services and write the blog. Pick any one particular service of networking. Let's say you want to write a blog on application gateway, just choose the application gateway only and write an in-depth blog about that. And I will just going to show you why I'm saying this. But this is the just once again I'm repeating, pick only one particular service and write a little bit depth blog on that. And after this, we have one more announcement. The announcement is that we are now evaluating the blogs, and once we get all the blogs and do the complete evaluation, we are going to get it published on Azure Dev webpage, and also couple of blocks we are going to choose to get it published on a Microsoft monthly newsletter. It is going to be huge. It took a lot of time to convince, but yeah, they are agree if we have a very good blog in terms of technicality, we are going to get it posted on Microsoft monthly newsletter, and definitely it's going to boost your resume. Writing that your blog is get published in Microsoft newsletter, it's going to be really going to add a lot of value in your resume or in your profile itself. So write a little bit technical blog, and to explain like where your blog is going to be published. So let me just slide back to screen. This is, I hope you know about this page. This is the Azure Dev page. I'm just going to copy and paste the link in the chat also so that you can go ahead and see it. Yeah. So here is the page where the normal Azure Dev blog get posted. So you can see there are some MVPs, and even there are a couple of students who also have written blog, and it got published here. Okay. So you can able to just open any blog and you can go ahead and read the blog. Then only you can able to understand what type of blog you need. So it's not like we are expecting a very depth blog, but yeah, it need to be good to be get added. Okay. So just do that. You can able to see all the blogs on this platform only. There we are going to select at least 10-15 blogs to get it published here, but we are going to choose 2 or 3 blogs to get published on Microsoft newsletter, monthly newsletter. So for that, we are going to do that at the end of the complete bootcamp by seeing all the blogs and everything. Then only we are going to post the blog. So you can just bookmark this page, because maybe in a couple of days you can have your blog posted here, those who have submitted their blog. So just good luck for that. And with this note, I'm just going to go back to the slide again once. So once again, I would like to thank the team who is doing quite a lot of work to get everything done. So thank you, everyone. And with this note, I'm just like to conclude the session and hand over to Ritik once again. Thank you, Ritik. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, Saurav. Saurav, there is one question in chat box.
Okay. Let me just stop.
Why do we need to write the blogs, technical blogs?
Yeah. So why we are doing it? So recently we have seen the drastic change the way companies are hiring. There is no such a single way, like company are not just go ahead and see your resume. They see what you are doing apart from your daily job or whatever you are doing, just apart, if you're a college student, apart from you studying in a college, what else you are doing. And blogging is the great way you can able to showcase your skill, that you are technically ready. You are technically ready for the cloud-based role, and especially in the cloud-based domain, it is quite important to have blog related to cloud to get an extra edge over others. And it is definitely a great way to showcase your skill, that you are technically ready. And we have seen that in IT, and especially in the cloud domain, documentation is one of the great skills that everyone need to have, because whatever the work you are doing, you need to document it so that your predecessor or whatever the team you are working with, they can go ahead and understand the architecture of your work, or how this application is deployed in cloud, what all the different services you are using for that product, whatever you are designing. So definitely this skill is going to use everywhere again in your day-to-day life. So that's the reason we wanted to motivate people from this boot camp to go ahead and write a blog. That's why we are doing repetitive things to ask you to have write blog again and again, because we want that it's become inside your behavior itself, so that you can go ahead and write blog apart from this boot camp also. Once the boot camp is finished, you don't have to just stop. Keep learning, keep sharing, and by the blog, you can also able to help other. Let's say if you have studied about anything networking today, if you write blog about that and share on your LinkedIn, people in your connection definitely going to open at least once, like, okay, she is my colleague or he is my colleague and he have written up this blog. So that person is definitely going to see, okay, what that person have written, and definitely it's going to catch the eye and help that person also learn something new. So that's the main motive about this blogging challenge. And also, and we had this opportunity to get your blog posted on Azure Dev channel and as well as Microsoft newsletter. So we thought about exploring that opportunity also, so that it can give you an extra edge. And definitely it's going to add a value if you say that, okay, I have written this blog, and this blog got published on a Microsoft monthly newsletter. And trust me, guys, there are only couple of blog only get selected for this opportunity. So yeah, that's the reason we are picking only one or two blogs.
Thanks, Saurav. Thanks, Saurav, for announcing week 3 winner and for a good great explanation. Congratulations to all the winners. I would also like to thank all the participants who gather right here and make time from their busy schedule. So a warm congratulations again to all the winners, and please do fill the form which we have sent you via email. So yes, this is from our side. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the time.
Thank you guys.